So my eye was recently drawn to a video by Frank Turek called, "What About the Miracles of Other Religions?" And I thought, that sounds interesting. I mean, a lot of Christians base their faith largely on personal religious experiences and testimonies of miracles, so the fact that all other religions have the same body of stories and experiences has to at least kind of undermine the core of what they believe in. Right? Because if everybody else in the world can more or less duplicate the phenomena that make Christianity feel meaningful to you, then might there maybe be a mundane explanation for whatever's behind it? I haven't seen this question come up much in Christian circles, maybe because they don't want to touch the topic with a 10-foot pole, so I was legitimately curious to see how an apologist would tackle it. And I was especially interested to see how Frank Turek would go about it, because among apologists, he has to be one of the most reasonable, diplomatic, intellectually honest... forget it. I can't say that with a straight face, and I don't even have one. So as always, please like, comment, subscribe, watch. Wait, I've already roped you into that one. And if you want to and can comfortably do so, consider supporting me on Patreon. But that all out of the way, I give you Frank Turek, the least aggressive, least off-putting apologist who has the least grating voice and is least likely to be found in an awkwardly sized shirt.
So, outside of that, I don't have much to say on it. Sorry. We have one more question?
You got one, Nate? Great.
Yes, sir. By the way, that book, Correct Not Politically Correct, goes into this in detail. And there's a new version of it that deals with the transgender issue and the bathroom issue.
Okay, first lesson in pandering to conservative Christians. Bring up trans people and bathrooms. But that so obviously goes without saying. Do we really need to explore it further? Lazy, Frank. Lazy. Even by pandering standards.
In fact, let me just say one other thing.
Sure.
Do you know what the new religion in America is?
Ooh, evolution.
The religion of sex.
Huh. It wasn't even atheism or secular humanism. Oh well. Well, if sex is a religion, then call me pious, because I go to that church every night. Huh? Yep, I definitely do.
Think about all the issues we argue over culturally. Abortion, same-sex marriage, abortion paid for by the government, contraception paid for by the government. Now what bathrooms we're using?
Yeah, nothing feels more sexy than when I sit down in the morning to drop a brick.
Oh, what are they all related to? They're all related to sex, because look, if there's no God, well, that's about the greatest feeling in the world, so that must be what our purpose is.
Okay. So this is pretty by-the-numbers stuff. If you're not a Christian, then blank is all that could possibly matter to you. Of course, we all know this is insultingly reductive. There are many, many ways we can find pleasure or fulfillment in life. Some are destructive, some are benign, and some, especially when pursued with a long-term goal while considering others and deferring immediate gratification, can actually be beneficial both to the person and to society. Anybody who gives even basic thought to the consequences of their behavior will recognize both the pitfalls of excess and the practical benefits of moderation in a well-balanced life. But religion trains people to stop short of contemplating this and only think of what they intuitively know to be constructive behavior as a simple dictate from God. So when a genius like Frank here hypothetically removes God and his dictates from the picture, all they're left with is a godless world they have to navigate for intelligent, thoughtful reasons. And since they've never introspected on why they already intelligently navigate it, they're prompted to think, I guess if the being who gives us our dictates weren't there, all that would matter is an unhinged life of drugs, money, sex, or blah blah blah. Then deep down they recognize that the consequences of this unhinged life would be devastating, so they think of how much better off they are for believing in God, even though instead they could just cut straight to the point and not do the unhinged things because the consequences would be devastating. So yeah, all that said, the short answer, if you wanted it, is that sex isn't our ultimate goal for a lot of reasons. And Frank's just tossing it out to his audience because he knows they'll never consider why, and it just lets them be smug with him. Even though he's totally the least smug apologist.
Right? I mean, look. If it wasn't for sex, Republicans and Democrats would agree on a lot more. You notice that?
Well, first of all, no. I'm not so sure they'd agree on that much more if we took out sex. I mean, healthcare, education, immigration, the minimum wage, corporate taxes, military spending. Of course, sure. There are Democrats who are hawkish and or in the pockets of lobbyists. But at least on paper among idealistic Democrats, there are a lot of differences on social issues that have nothing to do with sex. So it's pretty obvious Frank's just culling his list down to sexual issues, or issues like where you take a leak that he can weirdly construe as sexual, to construct a weird narrative of a sex religion. But for the sake of argument, let's say these really were the main core issues and sex was at the middle of them all. Is this really because non-religious people are obsessed with sex? Or do these maybe become political issues because the religious right has a weird fixation on restricting sex, leaving people stuck fighting for the right to engage in personal activities and have personal relationships that don't harm anybody else and aren't anybody else's business? I mean, if I founded a political party that successfully started making chairs illegal, I bet a lot of the political discourse would suddenly center on chairs. Not because the general public is unduly obsessed with chairs or because chairs is their religion, but because my unwarranted intrusion into their personal habits brought it to the forefront of conversation. And by the way, did you notice that this is an edited video? Yet they still included Frank finishing up a final thought on a previous question we never actually heard, before actually getting to the question that was the topic of this video? It's kind of weird.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so Nate.
Hey, Nate.
I've got a friend that has been an atheist for a long time, but then he's been adopting the Buddhist faith. And
Okay.
so when I talk to him about the resurrection, he agrees that maybe something special happened, but he also
Right.
says that when the Buddha died, that there was an emission of light or something that his followers saw. So I guess the question would be, what do you do with the miracles or supposed miracles that other faiths claim?
Good question. I think you have to evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. And when you evaluate them on a case-by-case basis, they pale in comparison to Christianity.
So does Frank really want people to evaluate these claims on a case-by-case basis? Does he for half a second suspect they really will, and has he himself? Or is he just talking about the ideal theoretical possibility of doing so everybody can have a vague general sense that Christianity has done its due diligence, while most of its individual members quietly ignore the issue and keep believing? Well, let's watch and see.
In fact, Muhammad, when it comes to Islam, said, I don't do miracles. Miracles were attributed to Muhammad 150 years after he died in the written traditions known as the Hadith, but the Quran says he doesn't even do miracles. He's just a plain warner. He just warns people there's one God.
So this is one of the laziest, most patronizing things apologists get away with. They just kind of tell their audience that, for example, Jesus claimed to do certain things that nobody else claimed to do. Then everybody feels special because their religion made different assertions than all the other religions did? But even if this is true, which it's not, so what? Why should this make them feel special? If all the magicians claim to make rabbits appear in hats using real magic, but one claimed to do the same except with cats, he might think that makes him special, but I still wouldn't believe him. I remember in college listening to Josh McDowell on my campus, which I did, shut up, and he'd milk this a lot. Of all the religious leaders to blah blah blah, only Jesus claimed to be God. I'm not even sure why they take this tack when it has so little relevance to anything, but there you go. And here Frank has to dip into it real quick, pausing his message on other religions' miraculous claims to mention that one specific religious leader didn't claim to do miracles. Why? If he didn't claim to do miracles, then why is he part of your video about religions that claim to do miracles? This is part of why I refer to this as Turek's Guide to Pandering. He just kind of meanders through soothing talking points without making arguments or even staying on topic. I mean, yeah, it's a question and answer session, so it's going to be a little off the cuff, but Jesus Christ.
So there are no other, to my knowledge, eyewitness accounts, like the kind we have in the New Testament, of some other world religion giving us or performing miracles or miracles confirming another world religion.
Yeah, the New Testament doesn't have eyewitness accounts either, but we won't get into that here. Frank doesn't get into it either as far as that goes. He just kind of says it does because, basic level 1 pandering.
Think about Mormonism for a second. What's the big supposed miracle in Mormonism? Oh, Joseph Smith had these golden plates. Hey, I can make golden plates in my garage if I have the right material, right? How is that a miracle?
I can turn water into wine in my garage too. I mean, I guess there's room for splitting hairs over how I phrase that, but you get the idea. Obviously, the claim is that an angel produced the magic plates or something dumb like that, which actually would be a miracle. But if you want to just skip to the end result and say there are natural explanations for where the story came from, then maybe it's possible to do the same with the Bible?
I mean, some things that are supposedly people find persuasive, I go, what? I don't get it.
Yeah, I hear you, Frank. Neither do I.
The Buddha, the light, is, what evidence do you have for that? I mean, I would ask, what do you mean by that? And how'd you come to that conclusion? What evidence do you have that that was divine?
These are great questions. I mean, somebody who believes in Buddhism probably has no rational reason to take the claims of their scripture at face value. And while Buddhist apologists might claim that there are scholarly reasons to believe these accounts, the average Buddhist in the pew really has nowhere near the expertise to even start addressing the question of whether there actually is, much less to be so confident in any conclusions about the text that they should feel it counts as evidence for miracles. In fact, the only reason they probably started thinking the text is reliable is because they were already invested in the religion and just kind of pretend to have been convinced by scholarship they have no clue about. Unlike Christians, am I right? See what I did there? I bet you do. Again, this is super basic stuff. As easily as he asserts there's good reason to believe in Jesus' miracles, Frank flips the coin over and just asserts there's no good reason to believe in other miracles. And his audience, without even beginning to evaluate either claim and having no idea how to do so, just lets him feed them this sandwich because they wanted to eat it in the first place.
And by the way, if he's saying there was a miracle when the Buddha died, it depends on what kind of Buddhism you're talking about. Some of it's atheistic Buddhism. So what created this miracle if there's no God out there?
Why are we assuming we need God to create miracles? A supernatural occurrence, assuming we had good reason to believe in one, could have come from anywhere. Why couldn't a wizard have done it? Why couldn't the miracle have resulted from some wild force, essentially another aspect of nature we don't yet understand, that just aimlessly does things until it's tamed and shaped like nature? The fact that Frank starts with the assumption that it would have to be a god, then criticizes a specific branch of Buddhism for supposing miracles without one, just shows he's not exploring or even arguing anything. All he's doing is having an inward-looking conversation with Christians about what they already believe, based on what they already believe, while pretending he's forming arguments. In other words, pandering.
When Buddha died, right?
Right.
And for those that believe in karma, that's more of a Hindu kind of thing. You know what karma means is that your next life will reflect the good or bad things you did in this life. And so if you come back as a king, you must have done something great in the previous life. If you come back as a cockroach, you may have done something evil, right? Well, think about that. What would that system require? First of all, it would require a moral law, so you need somebody like God. You'd also need somebody like God to keep track of all this. Oh, you did what in your previous life? Okay, let me put you up here. Oh, you did this? Let me put you down here. You would need a mind like God to keep track of that whole karma thing.
So again, he's assuming you need God for something you don't necessarily need a God for. What if there is no moral law? Or what if those words, similar to the sense of the words scientific law, describe what just naturally happens as a result of people's actions? And what if there's no need for a God or the mind of a God because the whole thing is just how the universe works? You don't need the mind of a God to keep track of everybody who trips and make sure they fall down, right? I mean, yeah, I think karma and reincarnation and stuff is as dumb as Christianity, but Frank's criticizing it for all the wrong reasons based on his audience's assumptions.
So they have to steal from God while they're arguing against him, right?
Oh yeah, of course. They steal from God. Because you haven't properly pandered to Christians until you've insinuated that everybody steals their ideas from Christianity.
So I would just keep asking questions. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion?
Yes, Frank says, ask those questions. About other religions.
You know what I've noticed? In fact, this happened a couple years ago. I was in Dallas. I remember I was in Dallas, and we were at the book table, me and a couple other colleagues, and some lady came up to me and said, "You got a good book on Buddhism?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, my friend who was a Christian has just become a Buddhist." And I said, "I don't know your friend at all, but let me just ask you this question and see if I may be guessing right here. Did your friend
Oh, he's going to say she just wanted to sin, isn't he? Yeah, probably.
She was a Christian, you say. Did she start doing something that Christians would consider immoral and the Bible would consider immoral?
Oh, Frank.
And she said, yeah. I said, so she wanted to maintain spirituality without the moral accountability. That's why she became a Buddhist. It wasn't because she thought Buddhism was true and investigated some sort of evidence. She wanted to keep doing what she wanted to keep doing, but she didn't want to say she wasn't spiritual. She went, bingo. See, that's the issue. You don't need a book on Buddhism. She doesn't even know what Buddhism is, right? She doesn't think it's true necessarily. She just wanted something spiritual that she could cover her lack of accountability. She didn't want accountability.
Well, I guess what's a pandering video without the statement that people outside your religion just want to sin? We all know this is the dumbest, most useless and insulting thing Christians tell each other. As I implied in this tweet, telling people that they just avoid Christianity because they love sin is as dumb as telling Christians they just avoid Islam because they love the haram lifestyle. People don't go around obsessing over the rules of other people's religions and shaping their lives around following or not following those rules. The very idea makes no sense, and by suggesting as much, Frank is just encouraging fellow Christians to try their hardest not to understand anything about how their religion looks from the outside. And look at how brazenly quick he was to assume why a specific person became Buddhist. Did they start acting differently around that time? Yep. Then I bet they just wanted to sin. Bingo! I mean, how the f*** do you know this, Frank? I'm sure the world looks like a pretty simple place from way up there on your high horse, but try climbing down off it for a minute, and you'll realize people are too complicated to be summed up by whatever careless thing you just stand there and blurt out about them. So whenever someone presumes to judge someone else's motives like this, especially when they've never even met the person, I would just ask them,
what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion?
But in all seriousness, this is one of the most destructive things Christians do to themselves. It makes them think that literally everybody outside their faith is only outside their faith because of a willful decision to be a bad person, which, you know, doesn't do great things for their ability to converse with others.
Anyway,
Yeah.
take it away, sir.
Yeah, so 30-second last final question for
Yes,
you. What is your hope for the Church of America?
Oh, my hope is that the church would be the church that we should be, and we would be engaged in all levels of society.
How do you engage with all levels of society when you go to them assuming they believe differently from you just because they want to be bad people? Look, I'm going to leave off here because from this point Frank just speaks in vapid platitudes about what he wants the church to be like. And if you've ever been a Christian, you've heard it all before in the exact same words. So let's recap by reviewing the many time-honored forms of pandering Frank illustrated for us today. He mentioned that trans people go to the bathroom, called a major part of non-Christian society that's not a religion another religion, claimed to know the only thing people would ever care about if they weren't religious, boiled political issues down to one form of sin, told his audience to evaluate claims he knew they wouldn't evaluate, asserted that Christianity makes different claims than other religions do, asserted there were eyewitnesses to events described in the Bible, asserted other religions don't have good reasons for believing in their miracles, assumed you need a God for things you don't need a God for, insinuated everybody just borrows the idea of God from Christianity, told Christians to hound other religions with critical questions while tacitly encouraging them to skirt these questions when dealing with their own religion, and, of course, assume non-Christians just want to sin. Frank is such a fine human being. This program was made possible by a grant from S.R. Foxley, Bob Generic, Brandon Lemire, and Q, and by the generous support of viewers like you. If you'd like to join them in pledging to this channel, please find a link to the Prophet of Zod Patreon below. After making this video, I feel like I should apologize for assuming Frank was pandering when it might actually be the case that he's just so f***ing stupid that he believes what he's saying. So sorry, Frank.